Y'all, this is wild. 15-year-old Brigham Hawkins is recovering after a black bear attacked him while he was vacationing with his family at a cabin in Alpine, Arizona. Now, this is an older picture, but I will show you what he looked like after the attack. He was alone at the cabin watching YouTube on the TV when the bear came in through the side door, came up behind him, reached around, and started swiping at his face. He has a rare neurological condition, so he can't move very fast, but after swiping him in the face, the bear turned around and left. Except it came back and started swiping him in the arms. Brigham's older brother heard him screaming, and he, along with their father, ran back to the cabin to see what was going on, and thankfully they were able to chase the bear away. I'm going to give you a trigger warning before I show you the picture because it's a little graphic. You can see one of the swipes there across his nose, and there's another one on his arm. He was transported to a local hospital and treated for the wounds. They also gave him a rabies vaccine. Law enforcement killed the bear about 120 feet away from the cabin, and its body was sent to a state lab for examinations and rabies testing. Officials want to warn everybody, if you happen to come across a black bear that is coming towards you, don't run from it. Back away slowly while maintaining eye contact with the bear and do things to make yourself appear bigger than you are. And they say that you can also throw things and yell and try to scare him away. Thank God the brother heard him screaming, or they could be planning a funeral right now.
There's a dark secret to why we celebrate our birthdays. I don't know if it's a conspiracy theory or if it's true, but it blew my mind. So according to the stories and what I've heard, is you know how we chant, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you. Well, chanting that is actually a ritual against us. Oh, these noodles taste like your mom's booty. And you know how I like your mom's booty. I know it sounds crazy, but hear me out though. You notice how happy birthday is like a chant. You light the candles, turn off a light, you all get in a circle, you start chanting, and then you blow out the candles. Tell me that's not portraying a ritual experience. Now let me tell you what I heard the ritual does. But first, what month and day were you born? Let me know down below. I want to know what sign you are. Me, I was born August 29th, and I'm a Virgo. Anyways, it is said that when we do that, it's a ritual that's sealing our fate to grow older. And that's why some people believe that people who don't celebrate their birthdays tend to look younger than they actually are. Now look, this is all conspiracy, and it's circling around the internet right now. But it's kind of scary to think about.
I would preface this story that a photo like this is my actual worst nightmare. It's Julie Watts and her husband Jonathan, and on December 2nd, 2017, Julie was home alone when her phone pinged, detecting motion in the downstairs camera. This was the frame that was shown on her phone. Before we dive in, if you're a fan of true crime, make sure to go click the link in my bio to listen to my podcast, Creep Time the Podcast, on Spotify or Apple. She saw this photo and she immediately jumps into action. She locks her bedroom door, she calls 911, she starts texting her husband Jonathan, who's all the way in Minneapolis on business. After a few minutes, she gets another alert on her phone that there was motion detected in the downstairs bedroom. This was the photo sent to her phone. I know it's hard to see, but if you flip this picture upside down, it is somebody who is back crawling out of a closet. Julie did not survive this attack, as when police arrived, they came upon a gruesome display where Julie's hands had been taken. Police had no idea who could have done this. This was the final text exchange that was surfaced from her phone.
This is why it's so important that you get into the correct Uber. On March 29th, 2019, 21-year-old Samantha Josephson entered an Uber that she thought was hers, and she was never seen again. On this day, Samantha met with some friends at the Bird Dog Bar and left to go home at around 2 a.m. She ended up waiting alone in front of the bar for her Uber ride. And at 2:09, she's seen on surveillance entering this black Chevy Impala. Samantha's boyfriend, who lived in another state, was tracking her ride and noticed that the driver was going the opposite direction from her house. He tried to call her, but after getting no response, he fell asleep, and the next morning, Samantha's friends called him and asked him if he knew where she was because she never made it to work. They reported Samantha missing and asked to see surveillance footage from the bar and noticed that Samantha entered the car of 24-year-old Nathaniel Rowland. That night, Nathaniel locked his doors after Samantha entered his car, and he took her to a secluded area and stabbed her more than 100 times. He then went to an ATM and tried to withdraw money from her card twice. The next day, Nathaniel's car was spotted by a police officer. He was arrested and was eventually sentenced to life in prison.
Get ready with me while I tell you how this woman threw her boyfriend's private part in the trash. On May 14th of this year, around 8:50 p.m., 32-year-old Shengting Gua had called officers because she believed that her boyfriend was dead, but she could not provide a reason why. Officers with the Grand Junction Police Department had responded to that call, and they went to the Wood Spring Suites on Main Street. The dispatcher stated that while Shengting was on the line, she was given CPR instructions and she was hysterical. When officers arrived at the hotel room, they saw a bed with a large amount of blood smeared all over it, and Shengting was crying and upset. That's when they spotted a naked, unresponsive man, and he was lying on his back and his feet were under the bed. The officers then started to do CPR on the man, and that's when they noticed that his private part was missing. Officers were looking around the hotel room. They ended up finding his severed private part in the trash can that was in the bathroom. The man was then pronounced dead at the scene. Shengting had told officers that she found out she was pregnant, and her boyfriend were arguing on who the father could be. She stated that while they were arguing, she did stab him in the leg, but she was not trying to kill him. She only stabbed him because she was angry. Once she had stabbed him, she then cut off his private part. At that point, she didn't think that he was in any kind of pain, so she went to the store, bought some beer, antibiotics, and rubbing alcohol. As the day went on, she noticed that he started to feel cold and she had feared that he might die, so she gave him some water, ibuprofen, and greens. Shengting was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and will appear in court on May 22nd.
This man lost his life after his pet hippo turned on him. Marius Els adopted 5-month-old baby Humphrey and took him to live in his 400-acre farm in South Africa. When Humphrey was a baby, everything was fine, but a lot of people warned Marius how dangerous Humphrey can become when he gets bigger. Marius ignored everyone and treated Humphrey like a pet. He would even ride on his back for fun and showed zero fear of this hippo. But it wasn't long until Humphrey got bigger and he eventually reached 1.2 tons and attacked Marius's nephew and almost killed him. But that's not all. In 2011, Humphrey attacked Marius in front of his family and took his life. This all happened when Marius called Humphrey to eat, and according to Marius's family, Humphrey's demeanor was different on this day, basically showing signs of aggression. Marius believed that his pet hippo would never betray him, so he ignored all these signs. When he continued to call Humphrey out of the water to eat, Humphrey suddenly stormed out and attacked Marius, biting into his body multiple times and then dragging him into the water. And this all happened in front of his family, the same people that warned Marius about Humphrey. What's crazy is that even though hippos look super sweet and cute compared to other wild animals, they actually kill more people each year than any other mammal on this planet. Just something to keep in mind.
This is a personal case a viewer emailed over to me asking to share, and the purpose for this video is to raise awareness on DA and GV, and I apologize in advance for the severe censoring as I have to. On September 1st, 2023, a girl named Faith and her boyfriend Isaiah were fast asleep while his 2 cousins and older brother were staying over. In the middle of the night, Faith was jolted awake by the sound of a gun going off. Her and her boyfriend ran to cover until they realized that the gun that was fired happened inside the apartment and was from Isaiah's older brother, Ronald Adams. Ronald had his cousin. The couple brought him to the hospital in an attempt to save his life, but were unsuccessful, and Faith and Isaiah were questioning why Ronald would take someone's life. In the email, Faith let me know Ronald was under the influence of shrooms during the crime. Now, let me be clear, research shows mushrooms do not make a person act out in violence, and Faith is advocating for Ronald to receive life in prison. Since then, her and Isaiah have been responsible for over $7,000 in fees due to the crime happening in her apartment. If you want to help out, here's her GoFundMe, and what are your thoughts on this case? Let me know in the comments below.
A mother is suing Snapchat for $10 million after her 13-year-old son committed suicide on his family's driveway. Timothy Barnett's case was initially labeled as a suicide and closed by local police. But 6 months later, messages were uncovered which showed her son sending money to a stranger in exchange for not posting explicit images of him on Snapchat. Despite evidence of extortion, local police closed the case and said it was not their responsibility to figure out why Timothy decided to take his life. Since then, his mother has gone to the FBI to help her catch the person who drove Timothy to his sudden death and filed a lawsuit against Snapchat for playing a role in their tragic loss.
Insanely dark facts and things that have happened at Disney World. When Disney had first opened way back in the 70s, Walt Disney had originally hired spies. He would station them around the park so they could eavesdrop on the guests and get a feel for how they actually liked the experience. It's pretty much common knowledge that Disney does have an underground tunnel system, but did you know that that system runs a full 9 acres under the park, and people have actually gotten lost down there? Roughly 10 or so years ago, there was an incident that was reported near Space Mountain when a guest tried to sneak on a duffel bag. When employees found out and they asked to search it, they found inside a 6-month-old baby. Why this parent was trying to sneak a baby onto a roller coaster, we do not know. In a lesser-known incident that Disney actually covered up pretty well, in 2004, a 38-year-old cast member who was playing Pluto was run over by the Beauty and the Beast float during the opening parade. Although clearly deceased at the scene, Disney refused to declare the death until the body was brought outside of the park.
Alright guys, let's talk about the Dear David incident. The Dear David incident is when Adam Ellis tweeted about a ghost haunting him inside of his apartment. He tweeted, "So my apartment is currently being haunted by the ghost of a dead child and he's trying to kill me." He gives very detailed accounts of what he sees during sleep paralysis. He states he sees a child with a dented head and that the child is trying to hurt him. The next day, he dreamed about a little girl and she was explaining who this creature was. She said its name was David. She stated he only appears at midnight and you can ask him 2 questions if you preface it with Dear David, and if you ask him a third, he kills you. Before he got photo proof of David, he drew a sketch of a dented-headed child. Then one day he managed to snag this picture and this picture. Even his 2 cats were gathering by a door where he saw David. They could just tell something was on the other side. In one instance, he went to take a Polaroid of his lit hallway and it was completely dark. A user found this face inside of it though. This man had a plethora of evidence and posted it all on Twitter. Comment for part 2.
This is such a crazy story. In 1998, 17-year-old Omar bin Omran went missing while on his way to school in the city of Jelfa, Algeria. After his disappearance, his family assumed he passed away during the civil war that was going on at the time. While everyone accepted the fact that Omar was gone forever, his dog, on the other hand, knew where he was the entire time. 26 long years go by and his family makes a crazy discovery. Omar, who is now 45 years old, was found. At around 8 p.m. on that day, police arrived to the home and walked to the back of the house and lifted up what seems to be a hidden entryway, and they found Omar in a cellar where this man kept sheep, and Omar was located and was sitting under a pile of hay. There's this blurry video that was taken of him while he was being rescued.
Imagine slicing your face off with a chainsaw. Well, that's exactly what happened to this man here, Bill Singleton. Now, Bill was 68 years old at the time, and when all of this happened, he was home alone. And on that day, he decided he was going to take his trusty chainsaw and cut down some firewood. Now, this is something that he had done quite regularly, so he was very familiar with how to use the chainsaw. But in the middle of cutting down through some trees, he realized that the tip of the chainsaw struck a very large tree, which forced the chainsaw to repel backward. Before he realized exactly what was happening, the chainsaw went right into his face. Immediately, he said he felt and heard the crack of his jaw as the blade went right through it. And as you can imagine, the pain was completely unbearable, and all he could think to do was to grab a handkerchief he had and cover his face. Although there was blood gushing everywhere, he did not fully realize the extent of his injuries at this point. And also at this point, he was not able to call anyone just because of the state he was in, so he did the only thing he could think of, and that was to get to help by himself. By some miracle, he was able to crawl his way to where he had parked his truck, get in, and again, by another miracle, drive his way to the closest hospital. Now, while he was driving, he did manage to get there with one hand while using the other to keep the handkerchief on his face. He also instinctively knew that he should not look at himself in the mirror because that would have just sent him spiraling. And even doctors agreed that it was a very good thing that he did not look at himself in the mirror in that state because it could have potentially sent him into shock. Now, there are photos of him in the hospital with a bunch of stitches where you could see the extent of his injuries, but they are very graphic. But because I can't show you those pictures, I will show you this, and it's a 3D model of what the injuries looked like. Essentially what happened is that the blade of the chainsaw had sliced through the middle of his face, cutting down his mouth and tongue before knocking out his front teeth and slicing right through his jaw. Now thankfully, doctors were able to save his life considering that he barely missed a very vital artery. And Bill would go on to make a full recovery, and you can barely see the scar on his face at this point. But this is exactly why I will never go around a chainsaw.
So do you guys want to learn about a creature that's actually scarier than the Native American skinwalker? A lot of you have not heard of this, and is actually believed to be the reason why so many people go missing in the national forest. Check this out. Let me know what you think, and let me know if you have actually heard about this. Alright, so unfortunately the original origins of the Fleshgates, as what are these creatures called, are not known. A lot of people believe that they're cursed spirits, evil spirits, or an unknown cryptid that we haven't discovered. And they like to wreak havoc, and actually people, when they encounter these, most people don't survive to tell the tale. They are also shapeshifters, and unfortunately for a lot of us that live in the United States, they have been sighted in national forests where a lot of people go missing and disappearing without a trace. So one of the things that we are warned through Native Americans is never to whistle when you're out in the woods, and there's a reason for that. This particular creature actually is attracted to people when they're whistling out and about in the woods. So in general, they are predatory against humans, and many believe that they lure people by attracting you and calling you by name or trying to mimic somebody you actually love. Let me know if you want to learn more about these in part 2.
This girl took the life of her whole family so she could be with a supposed 300-year-old werewolf. This is Jasmine Richardson, and she lived with her family in Medicine Hat, Canada. She was known as being very joyful and outgoing. Jasmine's whole personality changed when she met 23-year-old Jeremy at a punk rock concert. Both started to date despite the huge age difference. Jasmine had joined a website called vampirefreaks.com and fell in love with the goth lifestyle. She would wear heavy makeup to make it seem like she was much older than she really was. At the age of 13, Jeremy had identified himself as a 300-year-old werewolf, and he would wear this necklace that had a little jar and it had blood inside of it. Supposedly, Jeremy would go out to the moon, howl at it, and that's when he would turn into a werewolf. Jasmine's parents, Mark and Deborah, found out about her relationship with Jeremy and him being 23 years old and her only 12 years old, and they forbid her from seeing him. Jasmine and Jeremy did not take this lightly, and they were coming up with a plan to take the life of her family. On April 23rd of 2006, Jasmine and Jeremy went through with their plan and took the life of her family, her parents, and her brother. The following day, a young boy went to Jasmine's house to hang out with her 8-year-old brother, and when he was waiting at the door, he could see in the window that there was a dead body, so he ran back to his mom's house, told his mom, and she is the one who informed police. Once law enforcement arrived at the scene, they noticed that the whole family was murdered. They went up to the 8-year-old boy's room, and that's when they saw him just laying there with his lightsaber in his hand. Law enforcement also noticed that Jasmine was the only one missing. Jasmine and Jeremy were both arrested for the crime. Jasmine was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder, and since she was under the age of 18, she was only sentenced to 6 years in jail, and after that, she followed 4 years of supervision in the community. Jeremy was also found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In 2016, Jasmine was released from prison and is walking free.
Who is the youngest serial killer of all time? He has been called sadistic, remorseless, and committed his first murder at the age of only 7. Amarjit Sada was born in Bihar, India in 1998. Considered a loner and born into a poor family, the addition of his baby sister to the family made it much harder for his parents to make ends meet. When his aunt came to pay a visit with his 6-year-old cousin, he was left in charge while his mother and aunt went to the market. That was the day that his life took a dark and very twisted turn. It started off with him slapping and pinching his cousin before it escalated to him strangling her to death. When the parents returned, the girl's whereabouts were questioned and he immediately admitted to the murder, as well as showing them the location of the body. It was decided that this was simply a family matter and that it should not be reported. But it was less than a year later that he would strike again. This time, his own baby sister was the target, lifting her from the cot and strangling her. He was discovered by his mother and he said he did it just like that. But this time, neighbors actually discovered the crime and his parents pleaded them to keep it a secret. His last victim was horrifically a 6-month-old baby from the village. The mother of the baby told police that she left the baby sleeping while she went and did chores, and when she came back, the baby was gone and a police investigation was immediately started. Hours after the police started looking for the baby, Sada freely admitted to killing her by hitting her with bricks and strangling her, and then even led police to the shallow grave he attempted to bury her in. The young boy was taken into custody and interviewed, where it was reported that he showed absolutely no remorse, even smiling throughout the interview. He was much too young to send to prison or even give the death penalty, so he was sent to a juvenile home. Psychiatrists determined that he received much pleasure from harming others. The world's youngest serial killer was given a new identity and released in 2016 when he turned 18 years old, and his current whereabouts are completely unknown.
The German pedophile campsite is one of the most disturbing stories I've ever researched. A pedophile ring was operating at a campsite in Germany from 1998 to 2018. What was happening was a group of men was luring children to this campsite. Disturbingly, the kids' ages ranged from 3 years old to 14 years old. And once they were at this campsite, the cameras were turned on and the children were violently sexually assaulted. All on video. Once the kids were there, they were promised laptops, horseback riding lessons, bicycles if they complied with the abuse. And sadly, for 2 decades, nobody listened to these children. Some of the kids' parents even tried to go to authorities, but they never looked into this seriously. This disgusting group of men lured a group of underage boys at one point to a garden shed, and they then kept them locked up in there with no food or water for days. And these men would take turns going into the shed and assaulting each child one by one on camera. This footage was eventually uploaded to the dark web, and hundreds, thousands of pedophiles across the world clicked on this, downloaded this, and saved this to their sick collections. So like I said, this was a hardcore pedophile ring being operated at this campsite. Now, the authorities claim that they caught all of the men responsible, but who really knows? This was a period of 20 years that these crimes happened over. And there was a recorded 450 different sexual assaults on children. And those are just the assaults that the authorities actually know about. But disturbingly, we still don't know what these perpetrators look like, and the public doesn't even know their last name. That's because German privacy laws protect them. So this is Adrian V., one of the pedophile ring's ringleaders. But in every photo of these guys online, their faces are blurred or they're obscured. And like I said, their full identities have never been released. I don't know what the point of that is, but it's got to be one of the dumbest laws that I have ever read about. Oh yeah, and you ready to get angry? The 2 men at the top of this pedophile empire who had victimized 23 children over 450 times, a lot of those times on camera. They had destroyed 23 different childhoods. They were sentenced to 14 years in prison, another one was sentenced to 12 years in prison, and another one was sentenced to 10 years in prison. So for that many assaults on camera, footage that's shared to the dark web to thousands of other pedophiles, for destroying the childhoods and lives of 23 children, which are going to be people, adults. The maximum sentence received was 14 years. This should upset you. This should offend you. And this is definitely concerning because just a day ago, Germany lowered the minimum time that you need to spend in prison, 1 year, to 6 months if they find CP or CSAM on any of your devices. So they just recently decided to punish pedophiles less severely. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast that I co-host with my wife, Courtney, Murder in America. It's available now on all streaming platforms.